Good morning, everyone. There we go. Great to be with you, and great to have you all with us at this year's Danaher AI Summit. And it's great to have you with us for this first panel of the morning. So my name is Murali, Venkatasen. I'm part of the Science and Technology group here at Danaher, as well as part of the Ventures team, heading that effort across the Americas and Europe. And we're just in an incredibly fascinating time in the life of AI. And again, how about a round of applause for Dr. Topol on, which was, as a former electrical engineer that worked on convolutional neural networks 20 plus years ago, seeing the progress that's happened across the medical field over the last 20 years has just been fascinating and obviously impacting patient lives as well. But this has really been driven by several factors. Dr. Topol talked about the importance of transformers and how they really enable this exponential scaling of large language models. But we've also seen this across the semiconductor industry, right? With an exponential reduction in the cost of compute, with GPUs, with NAND, DRAM, memory, et cetera, which has really enabled a lot of this exponential explosion in the opportunity that we have ahead of us. And if we look forward now, I think Dr. Topol talked about the opportunity that lies ahead, and that's what's perhaps the most intriguing. Systems like agentic AI or multi-agent systems, which can reason and solve problems on their own. Physical AI, right? Taking these fundamental models and embedding them into robotic systems as well as humanoid systems, and we're already seeing this happening across the world, places like China as well as right here in Silicon Valley, all the way through to different architectures and opportunities beyond transformers as well, retentive networks, a whole host of innovation that's coming now that we need to be prepared for, and as Danaher as an organization, we look forward to partnering and working on as well. We didn't even touch on artificial general intelligence, which I hope we can touch on very briefly in this next panel as well. So I'd like to welcome the panelists to the stage. This next panel is really focused on decoupling science hype from science fiction, from science fact. And we'll really be focused on some of these concepts that I just discussed as it pertains to healthcare, right? So everything from AI-enabled drug discovery through to all the way through clinical development, through clinical trials, all the way through therapy selection and patient selection, as well as a precursor to some of the other panels that you'll see today. So let me call our fellow panelists up on stage here. Andreas Busch from AbSci. Welcome, Andreas, and I'll introduce everyone as we go here. Okay, and we have Najat Khan joining us from Recursion Pharmaceuticals. Welcome, Najat. Steve Crossan joining us as well. So Steve is a member of the Danaher Scientific Advisory Board, and so welcome, Steve, and Subha Madhavan from Pfizer. So welcome to all of our panelists here, and thank you for being here. Well, it's great to have you all here with us. Andreas, I know you're straight off a flight here this morning, so extra brownie points for you. Thank you for joining us. Andreas is the Chief Innovation Officer and Chief Operating Officer of AbSci and also a board member at AbSci. Danaher, of course, is a partner of yours, so fantastic to be working together. Andreas is the former head of research and early development at Bayer for over 13 years. He's the former head of development at Shire Pharmaceuticals, won a number of distinguished awards in the field, but I think most importantly, you'd say you've really impacted the lives of patients globally. Andreas has contributed to over 10 commercial molecules, including blockbusters, right, such as Xarelto, one of the best-selling anticoagulants, blood thinners of all time, as well as in the cardiology space. So welcome, Andreas. And I think a topic that's on the top of a lot of our minds here is the field of AI-enabled drug discovery. So according to a BCG report, we've seen over close to 20 billion flow into this space from the investor side over the last year through 2023. And even this year, we saw some pretty landmark announcements by companies such as Zera Therapeutics raising over $1 billion to go into computational drug discovery. So we'd love to get your perspective as a drug hunter and as a pharmacologist on where the AI drug discovery space is today and some of the progress that you're seeing internally at AbSci, whatever you're able to talk to as well.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's a privilege and pleasure being here. It's difficult speaking after Eric, I have to say. Yeah. one of my all-time heroes, especially having worked in the cardiovascular field. I think you brought up investment as one part, which is mind-boggling when it comes to AI. But this comes together with a number of co-founding factors which do give me confidence that AI becomes more important by the minute. You know, you have just an incredible increase in compute, you have an increase in data generation, and it's not just about quantity, it's about quality. And all that results in the aspect that on the individual elements of drug discovery, we have seen already significant progress. And this progress, I think, will continue rather rapidly. And I wouldn't be surprised if it would increase in speed over the next little while. But I think we all know where we are right now. There is an increasing clinical development pipeline with compounds which associate the AI prefix with it. I'm not sure how justified that always is, but clearly we have seen an impact of an AI on small molecule generation. We do see the first impact on generative AI on large molecules and antibodies. Clearly what we also see is an impact very significantly on target identification, validation, and in this context, of course, also on repurposing of compounds. All that is making its way into clinical development, but the ultimate proof, everybody is still waiting for where are the first approved drugs. And of course, my anxiety is where are the first drugs which connect all those elements, which connect a target which was identified using AI with a small molecule for that target, with clinical development aspects influenced by AI and so forth. So I certainly, as a very old-fashioned pharmacologist and physiologist who really had to learn how to spell AI a couple of years ago, I have a lot of confidence that AI is going to have a dramatic impact in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. And Najat, maybe off that thread, given you've been in the same space for a long time, I'll introduce you here. Najat Khan is the Chief R&D Officer and Chief Commercial Officer and Board Member at Recursion Pharmaceuticals, former Chief Data Science Officer and Global Head of Strategy at J&J for 6.5 years, a former partner at BCG. I could keep going on, but just linked to what Andreas talked about, I think Recursion has taken an incredibly interesting approach to AI-enabled drug discovery as well. Maybe you can talk to Recursion's approach and a little bit about the quantitation of what Andreas just got to in terms of acceleration preclinically, et cetera.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I think Andreas set it up really nicely. I mean, I think when you look at AI in discovery and also in development, you're really talking about improving that probability of success, which is the yield that Rainer was saying before, which is 10%. Genetic medicines maybe at best 20. And then you're looking at efficiencies, which is, can you do this better, faster? I think what you're seeing right now, and I'll go through it, some examples of where you can do it better, faster, but I think the real focus needs to be over the next few years is on that success rate, because that is the biggest challenge. The cost of making medicines is high because of the cost of failure. And can you use predictive AI abilities to reduce that? So I would say there's probably like 3 specific areas that lead to the huge failure rate. One is just better understanding biology. Again, Dr. Topol was talking about the use of multimodal, multi-omics data. That's going to be incredibly important. We see what genetics has done. You've gone from 10 to 20. Well, what can you do with proteomics, transcriptomic, and quite frankly, clinical outcomes data, so that even before you start a program, you don't just understand what is driving the disease, what else could be an off-target effect that you want to know about early, but you also have a better sense of which patients would respond. So this is the piece around precision medicine. So that's one big area. And Recursion's doing that with that multi-omic approach, starting in phenomics, which is just visually seeing how cells are doing. But that's never going to be enough, right? You want to add the genetics, transcriptomic, and so forth. The second one is around design of molecules. This is really important. Most small molecules actually don't work out in the clinic because of tox. So how can you predict that much earlier? And then the third is around clinical development. And I know we'll talk about it, but finding the right patient at the right time and accelerating trials, hugely important, because 70% of the dollars to make a drug goes in the clinical development space. So it's not just good enough to be fast in discovery. But you asked me to quantify, so I will. One of the things that we're seeing is from the time of identifying a new target to getting to IND-enabling studies, right before you're getting into the clinic, those timelines are starting to shift. For instance, at Recursion, and we just announced this first patient dosed, RBM39, this is a degrader focused on solid tumors, late-line solid tumors. From target identification to IND enabling took about 18 months. Industry standard is usually around 42 months. If you look at some of the programs, and again, the N is small, right? Because you're just starting. I always say this is green shoots. The cost and time, the cost is becoming about a third of what we see in IND to IND versus industry, and the time is about 2x faster. And one of the reasons for that is once you have those multimodal data layers, you turn it into a search problem. You're not looking at literature and trying to figure out what's the biological underpinning of the disease. You actually have all the data constructed, and you can better understand using industrialization, we'll talk about that, what the target might be. And then the second thing is using generative AI and active learning, you get much smarter at figuring out what right compound you should put in the clinic. So as an example, we just partnered with Exscientia. The merger was just completed last week. The average number of molecules we're synthesizing to get to the clinic is about 200. The average in industry is about 2,500 to up to 10,000. So again, those are good efficiency gains, but I won't be pleased until we actually have improvement in success rates.
Yeah, 42 to 18 months. You heard it here, folks. But attrition rate, what are you seeing in terms of a reduction in attrition rate in the funnel, given 95% plus of these compounds generally fail?
Yeah, I mean, what you're starting to see, the fact is, like, you're not going through 2,500 to 10,000 compounds. You're going to 200. So you're actually doing, I think Raina also mentioned this, you're doing more of the work in silico. And then once you have conviction, then you do the experimental work. But to do that, you have to have really good data sets. And I think that's why when people ask, it's been 10 years, where's that phase 3 win? The challenge is, unlike physician nodes, unlike the climate where we have a ton of data we have generated, if you look in biology, at best, somebody would say we understand 10 to 15%. There's so much gap. Think about it as a map with tons of gaps. So you actually have to build the system, build the data set to increase those the odds of doing it better. The last thing I'll also say, I mean, quite frankly, the cultural piece is really important. I think we do have some really good examples right now, but the adoption has been hard. And that's going to be another piece, because if you have bias in the systems, then you're doing the same thing you're doing today, if not worse. And that also affects your success rates. So you're starting to see some improvements in success rates, but the N is too small, but definitely an improvement in efficiency.
We'll hold that thought, because we'll come back to the limitations in a minute here. But Steve, maybe over to you. So Steve Crossan is part of the Danaher Scientific Advisory Board. You're a trusted partner of the Danaher Ventures team, working very, very closely. You're a founder of DayHoff Labs, and it would be great to hear a little bit more about DayHoff for the audience, I think. And Steve's also an operating partner at DCVC, previously a part of the scientific leadership team at GSK, and a former DeepMind person who helped found the original AlphaFold one that really set off this whole trajectory that we've been seeing here. So clearly, a lot of these novel tools, Eric showed that earlier with Chai-1, Boltz-1, AlphaFold 3, et cetera, are transforming the field. If you could talk to some of the tools that are available today, Steve, and how it's driving that transformation and what enabled these tools, I think it would be fascinating for the audience to get some perspective there, your perspective there.
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to be here and talk to you all. I think, let's start by re-echoing what Eric was talking about earlier. Dozens of models published this year alone. It's really, like, 2024 is the year where the adoption of these models, I think, has gone from we need to have a project to investigate this to this needs to really be part of our process across a lot of biotech and pharma. I think that is, testament to the fact that transformers are actually a great fit for biology, because we have a huge amount of sequential data, and transformers are an amazing tool for tackling sequential data. They're also increasingly, with multimodal models, able to attack all the modalities that we have across imagery and omics and so on. And really the strength comes from combining all of those into a shared understanding, which can then be used downstream. So I don't expect this pace will slow down at all. I think we're going to see benchmarks beaten every month, as we've been seeing this year, in terms of accuracy of predictions of ligand binding or whatever the benchmark it is that you want to see. Regina's here, and we'll talk about Boltz-1 last week, which is the latest cool kid off the block, only from last week. But I'm sure that, and I was talking to Regina last night, and she was talking about how there are so many opportunities for improvement on that model as well. So I think we're just going to see this getting better and better and better. And one of the things I think about a lot is, we're rapidly approaching the point, I think, where we can have sort of, in some sense, discovery science will be a solved problem. If you think also about the agentic framework that Eric was talking about there earlier, what are we going to do in a world in a few years' time, it's going to come very quickly, where, conceptually you've got 1 million AI discovery scientists producing well-grounded hypotheses with backup in data packages based on literature, but also based on kind of omics, et cetera, et cetera. Where does the bottleneck come from there? The bottleneck then becomes, okay, how do you actually then do the wet lab science to validate 1 million hypotheses? And beyond that, how do you then get those into development? And how do you get those into the clinic? So in that sense, I think, a company like Danaher is incredibly well positioned for the next 10 years, because this is Danaher's world. But we are going to need to think about how can we do what we do at, not just one order of magnitude greater scale than we do it now, but several orders of magnitude greater scale than we do it now, if we're going to meet the opportunity.
Yeah, so the bottleneck will come in the experimental generation, less so than the in silico work. But talk to some of the acceleration that we're seeing in this field, because we are seeing an exponential acceleration in these models, the power of these models, the speed at which they're developed. And you shared with me, the original AlphaFold taking 18 months, and this latest model. Talk to that sort of evolution and that acceleration.
Yeah, I think that's also one aspect of this thing, is that each model builds on the discoveries of the previous generation of models. And of course, each model becomes a data oracle to create more data for the next generation of models, which certainly happened with AlphaFold and also with the ESM models from Meta. So yeah, the first 9 months of the first, AlphaFold was started in a hackathon in February 2016. Two people, Marek Barwinski and Hugo Petidones in our team at DeepMind, decided to go after protein folding, and got sort of non-crazy results in a short amount of time, and we decided to start a project on it, and we put a small team together and started. But the first 9 months of that project, we just spent doing data engineering, basically, just organizing the data and get it into good shape. And that first version of the project, so by August 2018, that's when CASP 13, I think it was which AlphaFold 1.1 didn't completely solve the problem, but moved the state of the art forward, and then AlphaFold 2 obviously came much later. But that sort of timeline was incredibly fast in 2016. We only had one biochemist on the team, by the way, on the first team, and we had this great guy from UCL, David Jones, who came in and literally taught us biochemistry, taught us the bioinformatics course from UCL in about 3 months to get that project going. But now, yeah, within months, the Chai team, their model went from, they had a lot of background, but their model went from sort of founding the company to releasing what was then a frontier model in September, now left in the dust by Boltz-1, but was 3 months. So I think that is what we're going to see, and that's why we're seeing a dozen just in the last month coming out, and that's going to continue and continue.
Yeah, so huge acceleration that we're seeing in the field, and continuous innovation, right, that we just can't ignore being in this field. But I'd like to go a little bit beyond discovery here with you, Subha. So Subha is the Vice President and Head of Clinical AI ML for Worldwide R&D at Pfizer, former Head of Data Science Oncology at AstraZeneca for their R&D, and various advisory roles across the NIH, FDA. Great to have you with us. Thank you for being here. And your group is really focused on leveraging AI beyond drug discovery, right? Really focusing on development, clinical trials, regulatory, et cetera. Maybe talk to us about the impact that you're seeing across the industry, but also at Pfizer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Murali. And I want to echo the comment of my fellow panelists. I feel like a kid in a candy store after Eric's talk, right? Just what a fantastic way to start the day here. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I want to kind of ground my remarks in 4 sort of concepts, right? So first is, what is the agency that AI and all this rich data is creating for us? And then focus maybe a little bit on the operational aspects, right? Najat started to talk about clinical development and acceleration in operational. How is operational AI coming into play in clinical development? And then I want to touch a little bit on what we call as digital sciences, right? So we're moving more into this care anywhere model, where care is actually happening not just at clinical centers. They're actually happening at homes of people, the comfort of their homes, comfort of wherever they want to be using wearables, et cetera. So I want to touch on that a little bit. And then finally, this, in my humble opinion, really the elephant in the room is the culture, and the boulder, the person pushing the boulder image that Eric showed, I think reflects many of our lives, our daily lives. So in terms of the agency that AI is creating, if we think about just the data in the last 10 years, if we look at all of the, we won't even go there with the multimodal. If we just talk about the genomic data, the amount of genomic data that's being created in a year, if you put them on CD-ROMs, if I say that to my son first, he'll say, what is a CD-ROM? But once we get past that, the 1.5 millimeter circular things on which you can actually record data, and you stack them, you can go from the Earth to the moon and a quarter of a way back. This is just 1 year of data. And we're now have labeled, harmonized data sets that are able to connect genotypes to phenotypes, enabling lab-in-a-loop type models, et cetera. So this is creating an agency for us to now tap into all of these fantastic algorithms that we've been talking about all morning to extract insights out of this enormous pile of data that we're all collecting almost on a daily basis. So let's talk a little bit about the operational aspects of this, right? I think in my daily life, I'm already seeing the productivity equation be positive. So I'll come at it from a clinical development and a big pharma point of view. We generate a lot of documents. We are highly regulated in a compliant industry. We generate things like clinical study reports. We generate things like analysis plans. And these are hundreds and hundreds of documents that get generated almost on a daily basis that get submitted to regulators. First drafts, point and click with large language models and generative AI. We ran a challenge, and we and others in the industry as well, heavily applying generative AI to create first drafts of these very complicated documents. Yes, the factual accuracy is somewhere around 80%, but I don't worry about that too much because the end user of the output of generative AI are actually subject matter experts. They are statisticians, they're clinical pharmacologists, they're scientists. So, if you're putting these outputs in front of them, then they're gonna find, and the combination of AI and humans are just amazing. We have now brought it down from a matter of weeks to a point and click, literally seconds, to create these first draft of these documents, right? So that's the operational side of things. The digital piece is really extremely fascinating to me. I come from India originally, and India is a country where I think there are more cell phones than toilets, right? And what is the agency that's creating for us in terms of the number of studies that we can conduct on these mobile platforms? Recently, the EMA just approved the 95th percentile stride velocity for a rare disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy as a primary endpoint. This is a primary endpoint which can be digitally measured using a wearable, right? And this, having worked at a clinical center, I was in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University Cancer Center. I've seen patients come in on a weekly basis to measure all of these endpoints. The agency that AI is creating for us is how can we measure these at the comfort of people's homes? And these are primary endpoints. They're not exploratory endpoints, right? So I think this is just the beginning. I think the culture part, just to kind of bring it all together, and I think there's a lot of discussion around that, and I think collectively we as a community need to brainstorm and think about how we bring people with us, especially as we deploy this AI. My daily job is to talk with medical writers, to talk with folks who are sort of consumers of this AI, to evangelize the concept of how this can actually make their work better. And I don't want to be glib about it. This is not easy. But one thing that we are seeing really is that not a lot of people trust AI at the moment, but they all want to come around AI to see what others are doing. Can I gain more insights? So commercial and R&D will come together to actually see what the AI dashboard is providing for a certain mechanism of action so that they can actually make better decisions faster, right? So I think that's the agency that AI is creating for us, and how do we tap into this to really enable these newer ways of working, which is what is going to be necessary going forward.
Yeah, I'm also from India, and I didn't know that fact about India, so very interesting. Look, you touched on regulatory packages, and that's a huge challenge that the industry faces today. I mean, what kind of acceleration are you seeing there, if you had to quantify that for us? We're a very numbers-driven organization, as you can imagine.
I mean, yeah, I think all aspects of regulatory, your IND submissions, your BLAs, all of these are extremely document-rich. To me, that is the low-hanging fruit, right? And if you look at the programming teams, coming at it again from a biopharma perspective, there are large numbers of programming teams who actually create codes for TLFs, the tables and listings and figures that actually go into submitting to regulators. So it's not just text and documents, but actually code that generates these vignettes in these submissions as well. I think another big area, and Najat has talked about this, the health authority queries, right? So how do we interact with the reviewers at the agencies and sort of enabling folks to have that knowledge, right? So I always think about this human mind processes 6 or 7 data points. So when you're asking me a question, I'm thinking about what are the 6 things that come to mind immediately, but the AI can have 6 million data points, right? So the combination of that 6 million data point machine plus the 6-point interpretive machine of our human brain can be extremely powerful when we then have to respond to regulators. I mean, every day we have experts conversing with people at the FDA and other regulatory agencies. Imagine a situation where they are really armed with 10 years of discussions with other regulators, right? So I think that's the power that we're starting to put in the fingertips of our scientists and our experts.
Yeah. So clearly a lot of potential, as you've heard from the panel here. But there are also several facts out there. It's been reported that 70% of AI projects in general are stuck in proof of concept, not moving to production. Another interesting fact from Gartner is 30% of generative AI projects will be abandoned after proof of concept in 2025 for various reasons. So this is the reality of adoption curve for any new technology, right? So I'd like to open up some of the limitations that you're seeing across AI-enabled drug discovery. I mean, you talked about no phase 3 candidates earlier, all the way through clinical development. I open it up to the panel, whoever would like to lead off. Najat, maybe.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I mean, so there's a Nature paper from a team called Disrupt, which I co-founded. It's 13 pharma companies, the data science leaders coming together, and we did a benchmarking of where it's being used. And to your point, there's a lot of proof of concepts. But then the question is, why? I mean, culture is an easy answer to say, people are just resistant. But if you dig in a little bit more, it's the purpose. Why are you using the algorithm, and what question is it answering? And is it answering something that's an important failure mode today? So I think that there's a strategy element that's actually missing. And a lot of the times and this was the beauty of when I was at J&J, I was heading up both the portfolio decisions and AI. So one and the same, it's connected. And now at Recursion, heading up R&D and commercial, it's connected across the board. I think that is really important, because that's why a lot of these programs die, is because you're answering a question that's not really important to the end user. It's interesting, but not substantially important. I think that's one. The second is, of course, the cultural piece, right? You need folks that understand both AI and they understand the core business. Being bilingual is incredibly difficult in this space to find people. Do you wait for a generational change? That's too long. I'm way too impatient. Then the third thing I'd also say is that when it comes to the kinds of questions you answer, you actually have to run the experiment. So I'll give you a recursion example. We're using like industrialized workflows, so completely agents going through all of the multi-omic data, all of the LLMs, prioritizing which targets and pathways we should look into, leveraging molecules. We have about 2 million compounds that we have to say, okay, these are the compounds that could hit that target. That's the first moment at which a scientist looks at it. Is it perfect? No. It's so easy to stop the first time. It's not, because you might get something you're like, well, this compound is not good, the medicinal chemist says. But you have to run the experiment and actually do quick iteration of learning to improve it. And a lot of the times that pit of success is when people stop. Like there is a pit before you actually move up that cycle. I think that's where we are. There's a lot of hype. There's things that haven't worked, feels a little bit mediocre, and a lot of people walk away. So I love what Eric Topol said, which is embrace it. Because if you embrace it, then you say it's not a nice to have. This is a must have. There's no option not to try. We can't go on with 10% success rate. The cost is too high. It's going to be not substantial, like it's not going to sustain the health system that we have. So anyways, that's one thing I would say, and that requires leadership and buy-in and focus to say we are not going to just walk away the first time it doesn't work. So now, I mean, you'll hear us talk about another data readout that's coming out next week for a CDK7 inhibitor. It's a really important target in cancer, et cetera, et cetera. First few rounds, it didn't work out. But then you keep at it, and the team was able to get to the clinical candidate by synthesizing only 136 compounds, so less than the 200 I mentioned in the other example. So that's what I would say. And is it going to be right the first time? No. I mean, if our success rate is 10%, you can't expect 100%. So I think also managing expectations is going to be really important.
Mm-hmm. Steve?
Yeah, just following up on that. When you're on the exponential part of a technology curve, which we are right now, it's very easy to forget that the thing that doesn't work today will work tomorrow. Literally tomorrow. And so I see a lot of projects which fall down because it's good, but it couldn't do this one thing. But I think we've all got to remember that that doesn't mean that we can forget about AI, because that one thing will be possible tomorrow, and then 10 other things will be possible the day after that as well. I think that's a really important perspective. But another thing that I sort of worry about a bit, that where we need more work, is like in this current phase in drug discovery, I think at least, we are getting very good at optimizing, as you've discussed, preclinical, about getting much faster to IND. I worry that that's going to just make us more efficient at making medicines that fail in the clinic. The big challenge is still the translation challenge, and the thing that keeps me up at night is the famous 2019 paper by Lin et al. Which looked at a number of medicines in the clinic and realized that 70% of them or something were working through off-target effects. The ones that were actually effective, they were effective through off-target effects. And that tells me that we have a big problem with the models that we're using preclinically compared to what we see in the clinic. And so that then speaks to personalization, it speaks to digital twins, as Eric was talking about as well, speaks perhaps to more comprehensive organoid approaches. That's something where also as an investor, I don't see nearly as much investment as I see on the discovery and molecule design side. And I think that's something that we're hopefully going to see a lot more of in the next 5 years.
If I can just say, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the first wave of AI-enabled molecules are not going to work. And it's a hard thing to say, because it keeps me up at night all the time. But the reason for that is to actually have that translatability and go back and forth between clinical development and preclinical is not something that people do. I mean, that's why we're building out the clinical stage AI now, not just drug recruitment, but more around precision medicine. If we do it right and tie it to clinical outcomes, you should have that answer before you hit the clinic.
And that, of course, if you think about it, that creates a big challenge for the FDA as well, who are already thinking about, I think Moderna with mRNA 4157 is like shipping their hard drives with the code on it to the FDA to be approved, and then it's got to be locked down at a certain point. And then if they want to make changes to the code that they use to design the personalized medicine, that becomes a change request to the FDA. So I think there's some real challenges here that we've got to overcome at a regulatory level as well as at a technical level.
Maybe one more thought when it comes to failure or success rates. In my career, I have seen so much failure, which was not due to technical failure, but through so-called strategic failure. And where obviously AI will have a dramatic impact is improving the technical aspects of bringing something forward, whether it's the quality of a small molecule, the quality of a biologic or of a vaccine, the quality of a target you're going after, or the quality of a trial design. But then those things happen, which a lot of people here do not appreciate, which is, women's healthcare next year has less of a budget. So we have to take 2 projects after proof of concept off the portfolio. Things like that happen. And that is also where we need to make sure that the filter is tight enough that those things don't slip through for the wrong reasons. But really get kept based on true scientific merit. That is something I'm very often worried, and I can tell you that on top of that, when it comes to strategic aspects, very often all companies, they only maneuver within therapeutic areas. And AI may tell you very often, and we know that it did already when it came to repurposing drugs, that a mechanism discovered in therapeutic area A may be of much more benefit in therapeutic area B. However, very often companies do not know how to deal with that simple aspect. And they may stick around, and really follow up on the inferior indication, but not following up on the superior, much more value-generating indication. So we need to appreciate the fact that AI right now, and in the future even more, will be able to improve significantly the success rate for technical reasons, but we also have to spend time and a lot of thought influencing strategic aspects of decision making.
Yeah, quickly just to add to what are the gotchas and what to watch out for, right? We and others have noticed that generative AI is a language model, so it's sometimes can goof up on arithmetic, right? So we actually ran a global challenge for creating some of the regulatory documents last year. This is published in JAMIA. We found that, especially when you have, so in a clinical trial, we typically have a placebo arm and then an investigational drug arm. And let's say there were 11 patients on this and 11 patients on the treatment arm, it would actually make conclusions for the 22 instead of just the 11. Which is the control arm, right? So those are some of the gotchas, and and this is why I think at this stage of where large language models are, this whole trust development phase, when the end users are subject matter experts, you have the best possible way of making this successful. So always have at the other end experts who can sort of catch this, right? And then also, I think the National Academy of Medicine has coined the terms analytic AI and generative AI. So where are the opportunities where these two? Analytic AI does extremely well with arithmetic and basic arithmetic, like what I just described. How do these two come together to really solve problems and eliminate some of the bias and errors in calculations is something to watch out for.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to open it up to some audience questions. Just before we do that, get your questions ready, please, folks. Quickly through the panel, what's the one thing in the space that gets you most excited right now? Maybe you lead us off, Andreas.
I think the thing which gets me most excited is the thought of connecting all the elements of AI in a value chain. And that's not where we are. You still have one company worrying about target identification validation, another one like us worrying about how to, generate antibodies based on the structure, and so forth. But the thought of really, pushing a button on the computer and getting from a patient to a gene sequence to protein structure to a drug, with a good idea how to, then go into development. This is what I would say is exciting me the most. And I don't think that I was right 10 years ago where that's never going to happen. I think right now we are at a moment where this is in sight.
Steve?
I'm going to pick two. One technical, one patient focused. Technically, I think we're in the era now where we're getting very good at predicting individual moments or things about biology, this design of a protein or a snapshot of omics at a point in time. But biology is inherently dynamic, and I think the future is going to be about actually digital twins of cells, predictive simulation models of cellular systems and tissues, and eventually whole humans. And that is going to really be one of the big unlocks. The second thing is on the patient side as well. I think that one of the unlocks to some of the regulatory hurdles we've been talking about, or the cultural obstacles that we've been talking about, is that this massively empowers the patient. And I expect that the really successful health companies of the next 10 years will be very much sort of patient-focused, patient-owned data, patient-owned diagnostic, my own personal companion doctor, which is something which is kind of focused on me, and where I have agency and control over that. I can choose to go and get all of my X-rays and put them into the AI, and I don't need a regulator's approval to do that. And I think flipping around that model in that way is going to be a very interesting strategic change for the industry.
Yeah, what gets me really excited is, I don't know if you heard of Roosevelt's, like his quote, I love it, which is like the man in the arena. I like to call it the man, woman, he, her, she, him, in the arena, which is basically like we're so blessed to be in a moment of time when we have the algorithms, we have the data, we have the compute. Nothing is perfect, but to actually answer the questions. And I'm glad I'm not watching it from the sidelines, but personally to be in the middle of it, because again, every day there's a patient waiting. The second thing, something similar that Andreas said, is I think we're finally getting to a moment of having an end-to-end AI stack. And it's around integration for value creation versus point solutions. So like at Recursion, with a combination with Exscientia, you have the AI stack on decoding biology to figure out the target. You have the AI stack for design of the molecules, and we're building out the AI stack for development. And that is one of the reasons why there's like 10 clinical stage programs now. 10 preclinical, and over 10 partnered programs. You don't have that volume, which is what a mid-cap company, mid-sized company would have in a matter of few years. I mean, the first 5 years was just figuring out the platform, unless you can do things at scale. The game now is going to be not just efficiency, but the effectiveness. There are going to be some hiccups. I expect it. That's the pit of success. But you at least have enough shots on goal to try to show those use cases that Rainer mentioned at the beginning, that you can do things differently. That gets me excited.
Yeah, I think I'm most excited about democratizing patient privilege, right? If we look at cancer care, for example, 85% of cancer care in the United States occurs in community hospitals. They do not occur in tertiary care facilities like MD Anderson or Lombardi Cancer Center. Imagine a situation where the same level of care is now available to patients, and maybe even at the comfort of their homes. I'm sure many of you have seen Big Hero 6. There's this personal health companion, Baymax, which is an AI-driven health companion. When my son's studying computer science at Columbia, when he actually entered Columbia, I told him I want a Baymax when I sign up for Medicare. So I think I don't think we're that far away from it. I think it's going to be a reality sooner than when I sign up for Medicare.
Well, excellent. I think we have time for one question here. The audience, like Vanessa, the front here.
Yeah, I like to ask questions, as you guys can see. So, wonderful panel, great day to really start the day. And I want to be a little bit provocative. In listening to all of you with your maybe like more than 50 years of experience in drug development and AI, I want to get your thoughts in you know, the hype and the promise, the hope and the promise, actually. Because we know, we've heard about AI being the way by which we might be able to democratize access to medicines, to really impact the cost structure on the way that we develop drugs. Yet in listening to all of you, we are still in the time where we are generating the data to the point that Najat was saying. So it is not cheap to get to that space. It's going to be really cost intensive in the industry to get to bring those efficiencies. So I wanted to get your thoughts maybe into how do you see and when do you see that actually all the efficiencies in drug development that we are building now through AI will truly translate in an impact to democratization to access to therapies.
I'm happy to take it. Wearing my commercial hat, I think the way we provide access to patients for medicines has to completely evolve. And this is going to be very controversial to say it, but we are one of the countries that has a lot of middle men and women before it actually gets to a patient. Why can't we flip that business model where we actually go direct to the patient? We've done that in other industries. That is not something we do today. The other is transparency around cost. How much is it costing you to actually develop the drug? Here's the thing. If you start not making 10,000 compounds to get to a clinical candidate, but you do 200, that does reduce your cost. Same thing in clinical development, which we didn't talk about, but in my prior life, one of the biggest cost drivers is recruitment. And you can actually cut that by half if you're much more efficient where you're using claims data to go to where the patients are versus guessing where the patients are and going to a lot more sites. Why do I say that? There's many different elements to how do you reduce the cost. And if you have transparency of what the cost is, plus whatever margin you're adding, and ensure that you don't have too much white space between the manufacturer and all the way to the patient, I think we can change it. Look, we get things delivered at home today from Amazon. Why can't we do this differently? I think that business model is going to change. And remember, when it comes to cost, only 15% of the cost of healthcare system is medicines. There's another whole 85% we're not discussing today. A lot of it is the failed diagnosis. A lot of it is what Dr. Topol spoke about too, which we need to actually adopt to evolve. So the last thing I'll say is, it's going to get cost, it's going to be expensive for us to figure out a new way. But once you do, and you can do it at scale, then you should have economies of scale. But the biggest issue is the lack of adoption and the lack of running the experiment completely. Having the high bar, having the high quality. You can't just push things to the clinic quickly, hoping that it's going to be successful. Hope is not a strategy. So we're not there yet in terms of reducing the cost of care. I'm just not going to say we are. But where we are is to actually run the experiment on can we make better medicines, increase that success rate, the rest will follow.
Well, I think we're at time here. So I want to thank all of our panelists for a great discussion. I want to thank all of the audience for being here with us today as well. And next up, we have our Chief AI Officer who's going to walk us through some of our progress as well. Thank you, everyone.